Let me start with a scenario. Two people, same city, same year, same amount of debt, $100,000 each. One of them is lying awake at night, stressed, making minimum payments, watching the balance barely move, wondering when it's all going to end. The other one, sleeping fine. Because the same $100,000 in debt is making him richer every single month. Same number. Completely opposite lives. And I want you to really sit with that for a second. Because this is not hypothetical. This is happening right now, all around you, to real people. Some of them, people you know, maybe people you grew up with. People who don't seem smarter than you, don't seem to work harder than you, but somehow the gap between you and them keeps getting wider and wider. And the question nobody wants to answer honestly is, why? I'll tell you why. It has nothing to do with income, nothing to do with intelligence, nothing to do with who your parents were or where you grew up or how hard you hustled. It has everything to do with this one piece of information, one idea, one distinction that wealthy people understand and that almost nobody else was ever taught. And that's exactly what we're going to get into today. Let's go back. You grew up hearing certain things about money, maybe from your parents, maybe from a teacher, maybe just from the culture around you. Debt is bad. Debt is dangerous. If you're in debt, you're in trouble. Pay it off as fast as you can. Save your money. Live within your means. Stay out of debt. Now, I want you to be careful here because I'm not saying that advice is wrong. Parts of it are genuinely good. We'll get to that. But here's the thing about the people who taught you that. The wealthy ones. The ones with the real estate portfolios, the investment accounts, the businesses, they were not following that advice themselves. They were doing something completely different, and they didn't tell you about it. Not out of malice necessarily. Sometimes people just teach what they know from their own experience. Working class families know consumer debt, the kind that traps you, so they teach you to fear all debt. But wealthy families know a different kind of debt. And they pass that knowledge down quietly, privately, across generations. What you got was half the picture. Today I'm giving you the other half. Here is the distinction that changes everything. There are two fundamentally different types of debt. The first type is consumer debt. This is money borrowed to buy things that lose value or generate no income. Your credit card balance, a car loan, a personal loan you took out for a holiday, a wedding, a TV. This debt costs you money every single month in interest, and the thing that you bought with it is worth less tomorrow than it is today. Maybe worth nothing at all. This is the debt your parents warned you about, and they were right. This type of debt destroys wealth. Avoid it. The second type is called leverage. This is money borrowed to buy assets, things that either guarantee income, appreciate in value, or both. Even rental properties, business investments, income-producing assets of any kind. This debt also costs you money in interest, but the asset it bought is generating income that covers that cost and more. And it's growing in value at the same time. Same concept, borrowing money, completely different outcome. The wealthy use leverage intentionally, strategically, and at scale. They use other people's money to acquire assets that produce their income. And while they're doing that, you've been avoiding all debt on principle because nobody told you the difference. Let's make this concrete. A wealthy investor, let's call him David, wants to buy a rental property. It's listed at $500,000. Does David pay $500,000 in cash? No. And this is important. Not because he can't, but because he won't. Because paying cash is not how you build a portfolio. It's how you tie up all your capital in one place. Instead, David puts 20% down. That's $100,000 of his own money. He borrows the remaining $400,000 from a bank at 6% interest. His monthly mortgage payment works out to roughly $24,000. Now David rents out the property. He finds a tenant and charges $3,200 a month. After mortgage, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, David nets around $400,000 a month. About $4,800 a year. Now, $4,800,000 a year sounds modest, but let's think about what actually is happening here. David invested $100,000 of his own money. He's making $4,800 a year in cash. That's already a 4.8% cash return. In a world where a savings account pays about 4% and you're taxed on that, he's already competitive on cash flow alone. But the cash flow number misses the real story entirely. Every single month, his tenant is paying David's mortgage. The mortgage is paying down the principal on the loan, which means every month David owns a slightly larger share of a $500,000 asset. And if that property appreciates, which historically real estate does, the growth is on the full $500,000, not just on David's $100,000. That is leverage working in your favor. 10 years later, the tenant has paid down a significant chunk of that mortgage. The property has gone up in value. David's original $100,000 has generated over $48,000 in cash flow, and he's sitting on equity worth potentially hundreds of thousands, maybe even more. And here's the part that really matters. David didn't stop at one property. A few years in, he refinanced, pulled out some of the equity the tenant had built for him, used it as a down payment on a second property, then a third, then a fourth. He never had millions to start with. He started with one decision, one property, and used debt strategically as a tool to build a portfolio piece by piece. This isn't some secret. This is basic real estate investing. It's been done for decades by ordinary people who simply understood how leverage works. The only secret is nobody taught it to you. Now, I want to go somewhere that makes people genuinely uncomfortable, because this next part isn't just about building wealth. It's about how the wealthy keep their wealth, and specifically how they legally avoid paying taxes in ways most people don't even know are possible. Here's how most people's tax situation works. You get paid. Before the money even hits your account, a chunk is already gone. Income tax, national insurance, payroll deductions. Depending on where you live and what you earn, you might be losing 30, 35, 40% before you see a single penny. You earn money. You pay tax on it immediately. That's the deal. Now here's how wealthy people structure things differently. They own assets that appreciate over time. A stock portfolio, real estate, a stake in a business. Those assets grow in value every year. On paper, they might be worth 10 million, 50 million, more. But unrealized gains are not taxed. The asset has to be sold before tax is triggered. As long as they hold it, that growth sits there, compounding, completely untouched by the tax authority. So here's what they do instead of selling. They borrow against the asset. Their portfolio is worth 10 million. They need cash. So they go to a bank and take a loan with their portfolio as collateral. The interest rate might be 2 or 3%, far lower than any personal loan you could get. Now they have millions in cash to spend or invest. The loan is not income. Loans are not taxed anywhere in the world. They have cash. Their assets continue to grow. They paid no income tax. They live on borrowed money, secured against appreciating assets indefinitely. And when they die, in many jurisdictions, heirs receive what's called a stepped up cost basis, meaning the tax on all those years of gains is essentially wiped away. The estate pays off the outstanding loans, and the family inherits the wealth with tax liability reset to zero. This strategy has a name: buy, borrow, die. And it is not illegal. It is not a loophole in the shadowy sense. It is the system working exactly as designed for the people who know how to use it. Meanwhile, you pay tax on your paycheck before you could even spend it. I want to pause and ask an uncomfortable question. If leverage can build wealth, if this is genuinely how wealthy people operate, why were you taught that all debt is bad? Why is none of this in school? Why did nobody sit you down and explain the difference between liability and an income producing asset? Part of the answer is genuinely innocent. Consumer debt is dangerous. Credit card debt at 20% interest destroys financial stability fast. The warning is real and it's correct. But there's another part to that answer that's harder to sit with. A financially literate population is a population that competes for assets, that understands leverage, that starts building portfolios instead of just earning wages. A financially literate population, one that's been taught all debt is bad, that saving is the only path, that investing is too risky or too complicated. That population stays on the other side of the equation. They earn income. They pay tax on that income. They spend that income on goods and services. They take out consumer debt and pay interest on it. And all of that, the tax, the spending, the interest, flows to the people who own the assets. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how the system functions when financial literacy isn't taught. And financial literacy is not taught. Not in most schools. Not in most families. Nowhere near enough. Now, in Islamic finance context, this takes on even more significance because Islam doesn't prohibit building wealth. It doesn't prohibit investment. It doesn't prohibit using financial structures to create income producing assets. What Islam prohibits is riba, the interest that makes consumer debt a trap, the mechanism that transfers wealth from the borrower to the lender consistently, relentlessly, over time. And here's the striking thing. The wealthy understood what riba does to the borrower without ever reading a word of Islamic finance. They just made sure they were never the one on the wrong side of it. They positioned themselves to collect returns, build equity, use structures that generate wealth rather than drain it. They understood the principle. They didn't call it by the same name. Real talk. I'm not telling you to go out, take loans tomorrow. I'm not saying debt is suddenly your friend. I'm not selling a course or a seminar or a system. I'm telling you to understand the difference between debt that builds and debt that destroys, because right now, most people are only using the destroying kind, not because they're foolish, but because nobody taught them another kind existed. Here's the framework. One question. Before you take on any debt, ask yourself this. Does this debt buy me an asset that will generate income or appreciate in value? If the answer is yes, that's not the end of the analysis. That's the beginning. You then ask, does the expected return on this asset exceed the cost of borrowing? If the income or appreciation is likely to outpace the interest rate, it's potentially good debt. Research it. Get proper advice. Move carefully. But don't dismiss it just because it involves borrowing. If the answer is no, it's consumer debt. Avoid it. If you already have it, eliminate it as aggressively as you possibly can. Every pound sitting in a savings account at 3% while you're paying 18% on a credit card is working against you. Start small. The wealthy did not start with $1,000,000 portfolios. They started with one decision: to buy an asset instead of a liability, one rental unit, one investment account, one business, one thing that generates income while they sleep. And they did it again. The wealthy use debt as a tool. The system was designed so most people use it as a cage. The difference is not talent, not background, not who your parents were. The difference is information. And I want to be honest with you. Just having this information is not enough on its own. You still need discipline, patience, the willingness to get the advice, do the research, take the right risks carefully and slowly. This isn't magic, but you cannot make the right decisions without the right framework. And this framework, this specific way of seeing debt, assets, and leverage, most people go their entire lives without ever encountering it. You just encountered it. The tool exists. It's the same tool, available to anyone who understands it. The only question now is what you do with it. That's why this video exists.